guys, it's Bastian time. This is Games Like Zelda. Finally, a new episode. I know it's been a while, but just to clear that up, I'm actually pretty sure that I'm finally going to get back in the groove with this series. Sort of. Instead of weekly or every other week, it will be monthly, I think, starting at this point. And yeah, probably the third Sunday of the month or something like that. I'll figure out what the schedule is soon. But anyways, this episode is going to be about a game that I didn't even really know existed until recently, and have just played in like 3 days because I could not put it down. And it's called, well, in English, it's called For the Frog, the Bell Tolls. Now, that is a very odd name, but it's obviously a parody or homage to For Whom the Bell Tolls, and it doesn't really have anything to do with that book though whatsoever. And you know, the weird thing about this game is that it was created by Nintendo. It was only released in Japan, so the way that I've been able to play a translation of the game is actually, let's just say that it was never released by Nintendo, and that recently somebody created a fan translation, just last year in fact. So anyways, thank goodness for that. And this game is very odd because it was created by Nintendo's core staff for the Game Boy back before Link's Awakening, and these same people went on to create, well, a lot of these same people went on to create Link's Awakening and ended up reusing a lot of things from this game in Link's Awakening. For instance, the entire engine was eventually used in Link's Awakening, and then very specific things, like a character. You might remember Prince Richard from Link's Awakening. He actually really originally belonged in this game. His appearance in Link's Awakening, I guess now that we know, well, I won't ruin the end of Link's Awakening for you, but let's just say his real home is in this place for the Frog Bell Tolls. And so that's very interesting. And then down to really specific things, like this old man character, his sprite, that they end up using in Link's Awakening was originally created for this game, and really odd things like the bookshelves graphics and so on. So that's all very interesting. The whole reason why this game is so much like Zelda, though, besides Zelda ending up borrowing all of that stuff, is because it was actually influenced by Zelda to begin with. So things like the overworld are structured very Zelda-like. It's, of course, an overhead perspective, action-adventure, RPG sort of game. And it even goes down to the simple fact of when you move to the edge of the screen, just like what happens in Link's Awakening and Final Fantasy Adventure and the original Legend of Zelda, when you go to the edge of the screen, rather than the camera sort of following along with you, you go to the edge of the screen, and then the whole screen scrolls to a new screen, and you start at the other edge of that screen. So, yeah, then there are other things in the game that are very Zelda-like. Things like, it's very puzzle-based, so you've got to use your items in very clever ways. There was one specific puzzle that, it basically was pure luck that I ended up figuring it out. I won't even try to claim that it was my genius, but I really don't know how they expected people to figure that one out. I don't want to ruin it for you, so I can't really explain it. But anyways, very interesting puzzles in the game. And what's a little different, though, from Zelda is the fact that the puzzles don't really rely on a massive inventory of equipment, but really on the fact that you change in 3 different shapes besides your regular form. You play a nameless prince, and you type in the prince's name right from the get-go, whose friend is Prince Richard, and the two of you have been growing up together and have this friendly rivalry, just like in old chivalrous sort of tales. And so you've got this friendly rivalry going on, and you're always dueling, but Prince Richard always bests you when you're dueling. And but anyways, so you play as a regular human sort of character, but throughout the course of the game, you're transformed into a frog, and then there's certain things that you can do as a frog that you cannot do in your regular human form. And certain types of enemies you will kill instantaneously as a frog, whereas as a human, they're a little more difficult. And then eventually you gain a second form as a snake. And so, anyways, you end up using these forms in really interesting ways that in a Zelda game, rather than changing forms, you would probably just use a different type of weapon or piece of, an item or something. But in this game, you change forms to accomplish those same goals. So I guess actually Majora's Mask ends up sort of using those ideas a little bit. So that might be where Majora's Mask got their ideas for those form-changing abilities and so on for getting through puzzles. Another thing that's a little bit different from Zelda, although not much actually, now that I'm starting to think about it, is the fact that the dungeons are always side-scrolling. So while in the overworld and in towns and such, it's an overhead perspective, when you go into a dungeon, it turns into a side-scrolling perspective, and then the game takes on some platformy, very basic, easy platformy sort of puzzles, but I guess this isn't completely divorced from Zelda, and because actually in dungeons in the original Legend of Zelda, and then Link's Awakening, and I think in the Oracle games, and Minish Cap might have done this if I remember right. I might be remembering wrong. But in any case, Four Swords. Did Four Sword Adventures do this? I don't remember. Correct me in the comments down below. But when you're in a dungeon and you go down a ladder or something like that, then in a lot of instances it becomes side-scrolling. In the original Legend of Zelda, this was only the case when going through secret passages and going down to find the new item that you're going to add to your equipment is stored. In this game, all of the dungeons are side-scrolling, and so that actually kind of makes it interesting because you're doing this whole overworld top-down perspective thing, and then when you get into the side-scrolly dungeon atmosphere, it sort of feels fresh and interesting. So that's kind of cool. I'm not really sure why exactly they chose to do it like that. I feel like the game would have worked perfectly fine with overhead perspective dungeons, but anyway, it's kind of interesting. The game has a lot of very typical Nintendo sort of sensibilities where it comes to humor, so it's very silly. It's got a very light-hearted, whimsical feel, even though there's all sorts of horrible things going on. All sorts of people are being turned into frogs. There's this evil bad guy who's trying to kidnap this princess. But like a typical Nintendo game, more so than in Zelda games, it's very, very lighthearted. I mean, even the names of the landscapes and characters are very silly and lighthearted. Things like Pudding Mountain or something like that, and the princess's name is Tiramisu, so it's all very silly and lighthearted, and that is exactly what I'm looking for sometimes in a game. Sometimes I want a dark, gritty game, and other times I want some sort of silly, fluffy stuff, and this was definitely the silly, fluffy stuff. Another thing that is obviously borrowed from Zelda is the life meter, which consists of a bunch of hearts. Instead of the heart being divided into 4 pieces, though, the heart just gets smaller and smaller and smaller until it's gone, and then it moves on to your next heart. But as you may have guessed, what increases your life meter, but basically heart containers. They're in the shape of hearts, and you only find them in certain places basically after you've defeated a boss, although not directly after you defeated a boss. But in any case, they're in the shape of hearts, but they're called like life stones or something like that. But they're heart containers for goodness sake. But that brings us to the battle system, which couldn't be any more dissimilar from Zelda. It's basically an RPG almost. It starts out very Zelda-like. You know, when you're on the overworld, you'll see the enemies roaming around, and sometimes they will come dashing at you or chase you down, and that will cause you a lot more damage in the long run. But in any case, what happens is when you go up to them, rather than pressing a button to swing your sword at them, it's sort of as you touch them, it turns into RPG land out of nowhere, but it doesn't go into a completely different screen. It's still the same screen, but this like dust cloud sort of covers up you and the enemy. And what ends up happening is, and you have no control over this section, you will start attacking the enemy if you're the one that bumped into it. And that will take off how many ever bits of their life meter that you are currently in power for. For instance, if you've got a really weak sword and you haven't found a power stone or strength stone, I can't remember which is the case, you might only cause it 1 bar of damage, and then when the enemy attacks you, immediately afterwards, like in RPG turn-based fashion, it might cause you 2 or 3 or even 4 bars of damage. So the damage that you give and take is determined a lot on your equipment. You constantly are upgrading your sword and your armor and your shield, but also not by leveling up, but by collecting things that are kind of like, you collect those life stones to increase your life meter. You'll collect things called, I think they're strength stones, to increase your attack power, and then speed stones as well. So enemies that could start out really difficult for you at the beginning of the game will be so easy for you that once it gets to the point where the game knows that obviously you're going to defeat the enemy instantaneously, it just causes the enemy to be flung completely off screen, which is really, really like feels really good when you get so powerful that you're able to just fling enemies away left and right that used to cause you some problems. So in any case, yeah, this battle system is very not Zelda, but I don't know, the game just as a whole still feels very Zelda-like to me. It might just be simply because it was created by the people who went on to create Link's Awakening, and it itself was influenced by Zelda in a lot of respects. Or maybe it's simply the knowledge that so many of these things and the creators went on into Link's Awakening. So, I don't know, I'll leave it up for you to decide, but I definitely loved the heck out of this game. As soon as I started playing it, I could not stop, and 3 days later I was finished and wished there was a sequel. But Nintendo has never created a For the Frog, the Bell Tolls 2, The Return of the Frog, or anything like that, so that's unfortunate. But anyways, it's a great game. If you want to give it a shot, it's a little tricky because you'll have to acquire a ROM of it, and then you'll have to acquire a translation patch, and then learn how to apply the translation patch to the ROM. It's not so tricky, but it's a little tricky for those who had never done that before. So, in any case, I'll probably see you in about a month for a new Games Like Zelda video. See you then. Bye.